open the Tuesday, June 17th, regular planning board meeting at 6:03 p.m. We are being video recorded and broadcast live.
YouTube, everything.
Good. First up, our administrative.
Can I make, Mr. Chair, sorry, just a quick observation, looking at our agenda?
Yep.
And previous agendas, and this is for us and people in TV land. There are a lot of indicators of how well the economy is doing, you know, the price of gas, unemployment rate, stock market, so on. But the Westport Planning Board agenda is also an indicator of the strength of the economy, because no public hearings tonight. We've had very few developments to review over the past few months. And so that's an indicator that of lessening economic activity, fewer people wanting to build anything.
Future business
And
will be low.
I know we all want to preserve the character of Westport, but we also have some tasks ahead of us, creating housing for people. And this is evidence, I think, just one piece of paper of a slowdown.
A very short agenda. It'll be quick. So first up are administrative items. The first one is Francis Estates, file number 24-037C SPA-LID. We have to review a surety estimate with MDL's review of cemetery stormwater management and endorsement of Mylar plans.
There's no endorsement of the Mylar. We have no performance guarantee established. So in the subdivision rules and regulations, the planning board is not supposed to endorse the final plans until we have that performance guarantee. We added it to the agenda just in case it was, it was submitted to the board to be established, but we didn't receive anything for this meeting.
But we have a deadline for filing that with the town clerk, right?
The performance guarantee?
No, the signed Mylar.
The signed Mylar?
We have to sign our decision.
Right.
We only have a certain amount of days to do that.
The decision has been filed. It's the Mylar. And I don't think, I don't know if there's a time limit on the Mylar. The decision's been filed.
6 months, I think.
Yeah.
6 months it has to be.
On the Mylar?
I think it has to be recorded 6 months.
So there's no action you're looking from us for then?
No, there's no action for the board tonight, aside from just some general discussion on the surety estimate. I'll start with that. The surety estimate, or the performance guarantee, came into across the drainage, roadway and sidewalk construction, utilities, and other site features, is an estimated bond, which is what the applicant has expressed interest in doing for the performance guarantee as a bond, is $2,908,142. So that's the bond that they would have to take out as the performance guarantee for this development as estimated by MBL. This has been provided to the applicant, and we're waiting for their response. Then regarding MBL's review of the stormwater management adjacent to the cemetery, in one of our previous meetings, the chairman expressed some concerns about whether the proposed development was going to wash out the cemetery and its treatment of the stormwater on the site. And so we had MBL do an analysis. I mean, they looked at the site in its entirety, but we wanted to have them give specific attention to the cemetery on the site. And so the summary of this one-page report is that the MBL has determined that the stormwater management system should not have any detrimental impacts to the existing cemetery. They note that there is a berm adjacent to the cemetery that will be constructed with impervious soil that should help prevent breakout of stormwater through the side slopes. And they just recommended that as the roadways and other features are being constructed, that MBL inspects that material as construction is ongoing so they can make adjustments as needed. So we'll have them pay attention to that when they're going out and doing inspections. We expect the consultant to be out on the site regularly, because there are some concerns as from the board about the functionality of the stormwater management system, just because it was a very complicated system, how it was designed, and so we would like MBL to be on the site frequently to ensure that there aren't any issues as it's being installed.
What would regular inspections mean, or, I don't know, how often do you think? I mean, do they get, who establishes when they're gonna come out and how often?
We do, and the board. Well, we, I guess, the planning office and the planning board. Whenever we would like for them to go out there and inspect the site, that is something that can be done at the expense to the applicant. We haven't discussed with MBL how often we would like them to be on site. I think we would like to get a construction schedule first from the applicant to then determine how often we would like them to go out to the site. So with things being up in the air with the economy, as John had mentioned earlier, and we're still waiting on some other outstanding pieces to the project, I think we can discuss that at a later date.
Yeah, but it's just important to keep on top of the
Yeah.
progress, because a lot of things can happen in a week
Exactly.
time and nobody,
Yep.
it all gets covered over.
Yeah, right.
So on the plan that we approved, it shows the drainage easement for the cemetery. There's a stub coming off the road and going to the cemetery. And I assume that's taking stormwater away from the cemetery,
I don't have,
putting it back on the road, or what is that?
let me pull up the plan.
I guess it's just a catch basin,
Yeah, that's taking water into the drainage system.
right?
Okay, sorry, I didn't have the plan up, so.
And the drainage easement runs around the cemetery easement.
It looks like every house is raised up.
It is,
It'll be nice looking.
they're all on little mounds to the septic system.
Right. Okay. So, in the normal scheme of things, since we have time to discuss it, how does this happen? We approve it, then they go to the building inspector and get a building permit for the roads,
No.
for the houses?
Just, they can go, once they have this recorded, they can go ahead and they have to put up the surety that we want.
Yeah.
So they can go ahead and build the road, so all the horizontal stuff can go in without a building permit.
Mhm.
So the building inspector would typically withhold the building permits until the road is installed. or at least installed in front of the lots that they're going to be
Right.
developing.
And they either put up a bond for $3 million or cash surety. Or
So, I mean, I guess what I'm getting to, is there any way that we're notified when things start to happen, when they start to clear this place? Do they come and let us know, or we just have to keep our eyes out? Or if they come to a thing where they're supposed to be inspected by NBL, they come to us and say, we're ready for that?
Mhm.
Or how do we know? How do we know nothing happens for 2 years?
We can ask them, like I said, I think we should ask them for a construction schedule to give us an expectation as to when they'll actually begin clearing the site and starting construction. It's not a requirement, although, you know, town offices are just right around the corner from this site, so it's kind of hard to start construction and not have anyone know that
Right.
it's started, and I'm sure we'll end up getting some phone calls once it does.
Okay. Next is 720, 726 Old County Road.
Can I ask a question? One of the exhibits we have is the wetland replication. Does that have to do with Francis Estates? It's a different address, or?
Oh, it's a solar array.
Yep.
On Division Road.
All right, so that's listed under Francis Estates, but it,
Sorry.
yeah, oh, that's a separate,
Yeah, different
Well,
Okay.
If you look at the regular agenda, the administrator items are A, B, and C, and they're separate from each other.
okay. All right, okay. I'm looking at a different agenda.
So, okay, 720, 726 Old County Road, file number 24-003 SP-CD-MOD. Close out and release consultant review fees of $390.
If you recall, this was a project that the planning board had reviewed as an after-the-fact approval for a paved driveway. It was a common driveway that was originally gravel, approved for gravel, and it was paved without planning board approval for the modification. So we went through the process to approve the amendment. We've been waiting on final plans for a number of months. We've received the final plans. They look fine, and so, well, we're asking the board to release the consultant review fees, which we had held on to in case there were any additional reviews by the consulting engineer necessary, or any modifications necessary to their plans.
So is there any interest?
$390, I would imagine it
Yeah.
would be very small,
Well,
if any.
so, need a motion?
Yep. Mr. Chair, I move that we release the consultant inspection funds of $390 plus interest for 720 to 726 Old County Road.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next is 359 Division Road Solar, file number 22-001 SP-SPA-LID-S. Review wetlands replication and revegetation project report.
This is a report that was provided to the planning office as well as the Conservation Commission for wetlands replication at this particular solar site. This, just want to note, this wasn't a condition of approval for the planning board, but I just wanted to let you all have an opportunity to look at it and discuss anything as needed. It does somewhat impact the requirement for landscaping on the site, so that, I guess that's where the overlap for the planning board is. But anyway, so the wetlands replication is complete on the site, and this has been inspected by the conservation agent, Chris Capone. He said that the crossings and the replication areas are fine, but the vegetation still needs to establish in the replication area. I understand that there are some shrubs that haven't established in the wetlands area, and so those will need to be replaced. Also, that the site, I don't want to say it in its entirety because I haven't been there myself, but it's substantially unseeded and loamed. So that is a big outstanding piece of the project from the planning board's perspective, to reseed, to loam and reseed with a pollinator-friendly seed. So I can show you.
This is not just on the roadway, this is on the
Yeah,
field.
yeah. So the conservation agent was out on the site last week. There aren't photos in your packets of this. He just sent the photos to me today, so I'll put them up here.
Okay.
That's one of the crossings, and they had to build a culvert over one of the stream crossings. But here's the site as of, I think it was June 12th, so just a week ago. As you can see, none of the areas of disturbance adjacent to the roadway, and as well around the solar arrays. The vegetation really hasn't established. You can see some of the wildflower growth there
Mhm.
in the foreground, but obviously the rest of the site is just, it has not established. And that's it.
Well, there was one, can you go back there? It looked like there wasn't very, the drainage wasn't working very well. Or was that a shadow? I was looking at that,
This one?
yeah. There's a culvert leading out of it, but it appears to be higher than the water surface.
I don't know when this photo was taken, if he had gone out right after a rain event or not. But we'll have the consulting engineer do an assessment of the site drainage, so.
So the key sentence in their executive summary is the wetland replication of 26,000 square feet of forested wetland areas mitigation was successful. Even though, I assume that means that's all planted, it just hasn't shown yet, is that? It's all seeded,
these-
but-
These photos, I think these photos aren't actually of the wetland replication area. This is just some photos
alright.
the conservation agent took to show the planning board that the vegetation hasn't established on the site. The wetlands replication area, I guess, if you look on after the executive summary, 3 pages after that, the replication area is adjacent to the drive. There's a long drive to get back into the cleared area, and that this is it's adjacent to that driveway. Actually, it's right before this crossing right here. So I don't have pictures of it. There are pictures of it in the full report. But I don't have photos of the replication area as of last week. And just for the record, the conservation agent does, aside from some of the shrubbery that hasn't established, well, it's died and needs to be replaced, he does concur that with the landscaping that has established the replication area has been successful.
Do you need any action from us?
No action. Especially like I said with the replication area, that's more of a conservation commission issue. But just be aware that when they come back to us for another site inspection, I'm sure we'll have another report here, and about the landscape plantings as well as the seeding of the area around the solar array. They've been told that those haven't established, and they've provided the photos from the conservation agent. So hopefully they'll address that this summer.
Hey, what are we seeing here?
This is, if you look on there's that map of the wetlands replication area. So
Yeah.
that's the culvert right here. Right before, or I guess the culvert is after the replication area as you go into the
So the
site.
replication is on this side?
It would be on the opposite side
Opposite.
of, yeah, I think.
So it's okay to have all those exposed conduits? Is that part of their plan?
That, I believe that is part of the plan. Chris said that the crossing was fine. He
Yeah.
inspected it, so.
Okay. What do I know? Okay, so we don't need anything to do, it's just an update?
Yep.
Okay, so planners report?
Yesterday, so first item is hazard mitigation plan update. We had a meeting, a public meeting for the hazard mitigation plan. It was not very well attended. It was John, Bob, Phil Weinberg, who's on the Climate Resilience Committee, Board of Health, Conservation Commission, and then a representative from Coastal Zone Management, and that was it. So we didn't really have public at large at the meeting, unfortunately. So we're going to work on trying to get some more public engagement in that process through surveying and trying to meet people where they're at. I think that tends to be more successful. So going to different events around town and talking about the planning process that we're doing. I think that's a lot more effective than trying to hold a public meeting, just because I think you get a larger cross-section of people. You get the folks who always turn out to stuff, but then you also get people who are, interested, but they're not necessarily going to come out to a public meeting. But anyway, that's that on the attendance. But the point of the meeting was to take there's a whole set of recommendations in the hazard mitigation plan that was developed through a previous public meeting, as well as the hazard mitigation planning committee. And there's a whole host of different policy recommendations in that document. A lot of them are interrelated, so we want the consultant to go and consolidate some of those, and also to focus on some of the projects that we can, or to emphasize some of the projects that we can do now and actually implement without too much heavy lifting, so we can show the public that these planning processes are actually being converted into into either new infrastructure around town or new policies in town. So one thing that we had talked about at length yesterday that is a pretty easy thing to install in town is just marking areas where there are flood hazard areas, to let people know this is a flood hazard area. If there's a high rain event or a storm surge, these are areas that are potentially dangerous to travel through during those events. So they're going to reduce the number of recommendations in that section of the plan. There was like 7 or 8 pages, so we want to condense things, combine like items, And then we'll circulate it back out with the committee for their further review, and we'll reconvene the committee at that time.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think we've all been at lots of public hearings and lots of efforts to solicit public opinion. And it does seem that human nature being what it is, when we have meetings that are asking people up front what their ideas are, people tend not to show up, even though we're saying this is the time to have input. And when recommendations are made, or when they go before town meeting or any other body that needs to fund it, then people will start paying more attention. And all of us regret, well, why didn't we get that attention when we were asking for it? But that's the way human nature is. So I think that what Michael's talking about, and it's a point I tried to make last night, is if there are some easy lift, kind of obvious recommendations that can be implemented, whether it's identification of hazardous zones, or whether it's signs that point out evacuation routes, that when people see something happening, that may help us get their attention. And it will strengthen the community outreach if some of these recommendations that are non-controversial, easy to do, get done out of the gate, if it's possible to do that.
Yeah, I think Michael's idea about trying to meet people where they are already
Yeah.
congregating. Last summer, Michael and I don't know who else,
It was the,
manned a booth at the,
yeah,
at the.
Watershed.
No, not the watershed, the
it's the,
the fair.
there's
at
some
the
people at the,
handicaps.
at the fair, there was an art,
Historical
at the,
Society.
yeah, and then there's the one at the Historical Society, yeah.
Yeah, but you also had one at River Days too.
Yep.
Yeah.
And are we gonna have one next weekend, this weekend?
I think Jeff is maybe going to be
Jeff is
there,
gonna do it.
yeah. Well, this Saturday,
It's this Saturday, right?
yeah. Yeah, we've been making an effort to do that with more of our public engagement, approaches to public engagement. It's more, a little bit more time and labor intensive, but you reach more people in general, and I think you reach more people who would not necessarily come out to a public meeting, but they'll stop by and give you their 2 cents, and I think it gets more people involved in the process, and talking to folks like us who they wouldn't normally be talking to, and I think it's good to just be out in the community.
Okay.
The next one is Coldwater, an update on our Coldwater Culverts project. We did actually, even though this was a traditional public meeting, we did have a fairly decent turnout for this meeting. We probably had 10 or 15 people for this meeting.
How
A
many?
lot of, probably like 10 or 15 people
Okay,
come
I thought
out.
You said 115.
No. We would not have been allowed to be in the library with that many people. But we had a fair amount of folks from Drift Road and Cornell Road come out who were curious about what was being planned in these areas. And I think the main concerns from the community was the aesthetics of the bridges, which there's not a lot that we can do with the Massachusetts stream and bridge crossing standards. However, there are some things that the community, because you have to have a large box culvert for a bridge crossing, for example, you have to have a large box culvert installed. So there's not a lot you can do with the aesthetics of that. But there are some treatments of the exterior of the culvert that you can do, like having having stamped concrete, or incorporating a facade with some of the existing materials that are on the site. You can, or another suggestion someone had was having an inlay of granite on the wing walls of the box culvert. So there's some things you can do to try to make it, make it look like less of an industrial structure, and that fits a little bit more in the character of the neighborhood. And then they also wanted to make sure that if we are installing guardrails on the bridge crossings, that the bridge crossings are adequately accommodating pedestrians and bikers, so that the guardrails are not narrowing the roadway too much in those areas, so then folks feel unsafe crossing that bridge as they bike or run down the road. So the project team will be presenting again to the select board. It'll be in the next fiscal year. They'll be presenting the same presentation, but we want to get the select board involved early on in the process. So that's the next steps. We're still waiting on notification about some of the funding that we've applied for. The big ticket one was the Federal Highways Administration Aquatic Organism Passage Grant, which would bring these forward through construction. Haven't heard anything about that. I think it has not been cut. The project or the grant website still exists, so it may still be out there. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot changing right now, and federal grants also can just take a while. That's the nature of them, and they can take some time to get notices out of award, and so we'll see what happens.
Can you remind us how much
That one was around $3 million. So it may not be able to take all 3 culvert locations through construction, but it would be able to advance them through full engineered plans, and then advance, I think, 1 or 2 of them through construction. All right, I'll move on to 2026 zoning amendments. I have another addition to our list of various zoning amendments to consider for town meeting next year. A couple of weeks ago, myself, Conservation Building, and the town administrator met with the state to talk about our floodplain administration, and through that meeting they let us know that there were a handful of modifications that were necessary to our floodplain bylaw. Most of it is just tightening up some of the language. For example, there are some outdated mailing addresses in the zoning bylaw that need to be probably just removed. We need to, there's a reference to, there's a repeated definition in the bylaw, so they said that we should remove that. There is a definition we need to update some of the requirements for floodway encroachment, and there's a Massachusetts model floodplain bylaw that we'll base that off of. So I'll give you all the actual in-text, like the redlined in-text amendment for a future meeting, but that's something that we should consider for town meeting next year.
Good. Is there anything that we would want to consider in that zoning above and beyond what the state requires?
We could. The building code is also, there is a new building code for floodplain development that takes effect this summer. I think it's within a couple of months, if it hasn't already. And it will be more restrictive than what is currently in place. So, for example, you have to have 3 feet of freeboard above base flood elevation in development that's in the flood zone. So freeboard is the space between the lowest horizontal member of the structure and the top of the base flood elevation. So there's a new whole host of more restrictive standards and building code that will take effect. So I think in order to layer on any additional above and beyond zoning amendments, we need to get a handle on what is already in the building code.
Yeah. So that means in the velocity zone, instead of 16 feet above sea level, it's gonna be 19 feet?
Yeah, but it depends on the location, but yeah, you'll have to have additional space between. I think actually with the current building code, it's a foot of freeboard, and now
Yes.
it's going to be 3 feet.
The lowest structural member has to be a foot above, the bottom of the lowest structural member has to be a foot above the projected wave height.
So now it's gonna be 2 feet higher. Are they changing any of the floodplain elevations?
Not for us. They're always reassessing various parts of the state and the country, really. But not, Westport's were just reassessed, when was that? 5 years ago? 6 years ago? I don't know.
Yeah, I think about 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
ago,
So
So-
ours are pretty current.
yeah. So in inland, downstream of dams, is there any regulation for that floodplain or that possible floodplain?
I don't believe so. I don't know.
Because I've gone through the whole Serpent area, dam by dam, and there's a lot of dams.
Yeah.
And they are all, their nomenclature is kind of crazy, and maybe Bob understands this, but I would say 90% of them are listed as high hazard dams.
Yeah.
And
Dam.
I don't know if that means that it's an imminent hazard, or if it fails, it's a
If they
hazard.
were to fail, they would have, they would have a significant damaging result.
Yeah, a dam is typically going to remove land out of the flood zone, so I don't think that there is any sort of risk structure that FEMA has to regulate the potential for dam failure.
And what I don't understand is who's keeping track of the dams?
There is a state agency,
Is it?
it's in the department, in DCR, Department of Conservation.
Call the dam agency.
Okay.
And last up is an update on a grant I'm currently in the works, or that's currently in the works. I'm writing this with Woods Hole Group and the Conservation Commission. This is for the Coastal Zone Management Grant. It would be an application to continue the barrier beach management planning we're doing at East Beach, Atlantic Avenue, and Beach Avenue. And so what this grant would do would fund the beach management plans through, well, take a step back. The deliverable, due to the short time frame for this grant, for this grant period, is a draft barrier beach management plan for each of those 3 locations. This grant would take this through a full draft management plan, and then would take it to permitting with the Conservation Commission and with DEP, so that there is a full, in effect, beach management plan at each of those 3 locations. So a lot of this is going to, a lot of the funds are going to go into continuing the extensive public engagement we're doing at these 3 locations. And then another thing we're going to include as an optional item potentially for CZM to include. We didn't want to try to grab everything that's in the pot, just because we know that this year is going to be, there's going to be a lot of people asking for funds in this program because the Fed is rolling back different grant programs. But we would like to, if there's money available, to look at some beach and dune restoration concepts, and also to do some drone analysis to upgrade or to continue to look at the topography and assess the beach conditions as it changes over time. So we'd like to do that over the lifetime of the grant as well. So this is a about $110,000 grant request with about $13,000 in match being provided. Some of that's being provided through in-kind, through town labor between the planning office and the conservation office. And then the Conservation Commission is providing the remainder of the match in cash from their wetlands fund.
Is this state money or?
State money.
State.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's anticipated just because of rollbacks in federal grant programming that there will be a lot more ask this year
Sure.
than there has been in previous years.
Well, it's a good sign that Sam Haynes is continuing to show up for various things.
The CZM team's very supportive, Sam Haynes and Rebecca Haney. They're very supportive of this project, and they encouraged us to apply again. So I think that's a good sign. Oh, and then I have a support letter for the planning board to vote on, to support the application, and then for Jim, for you to sign it. For the coastal zone management grant application.
So Michael, have you had any notification of any grant monies that have been, I don't know if the term is pulled, that, you know, they're not gonna be available? Not that we, not monies that we didn't get, but through applying, but they're just not available to anybody. Have you heard any of those?
Yeah,
instances?
fortunately, the planning board hasn't had, and I don't believe the town, well, I don't want to speak for I know the fire department has some federal grants, so I don't know about them, but I think between town hall and the town annex, I don't think we've had any grant funding pulled. There is a dashboard that, I'm blanking on which office provided. Senator Markey's office has prepared, showing the various different funding sources that have been eliminated. So those resources do exist through the state that you can check to see what was available last year that may not be available now.
So, Michael, where do the cold water culvert grants, where do they come from? that come from EPA,
It's a common,
DEP,
so it's been a
Mass
combination of different sources. So some of it's been through DEP, some of it's been through the Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program. And then the one grant that we've applied for is through the Federal Highways Administration. That's the large one.
Okay, so we should put it on our radar, if not actively try to pursue it now, is to replace the culvert on River Road that goes into Cocky's Pond. It is hard for herring to get through that because it's round and it's fast moving. And what really should be done is the bottomless culvert.
Yeah.
And I think the various water companies that are going underneath it or over it, now is the time to do it. So, and require them to directionally drill deep enough underneath that they're not gonna disturb anything.
Yeah, if we see something, I can also reach out to Buzzards Bay Coalition, and they may be interested in partnering on that. We've been partnering with them on these cold water culverts.
And
That's,
the Watershed Alliance too, they
Yep.
partnered with the town before to do that. But also, I think Mass, whatever it is, Fish and Game, or whatever it is, it's
Mhm.
called, I think they would be very interested in that.
yeah. And that's all I have for the planner's report.
Okay, are you gonna give us the assistant planner's report? He's not here.
I can, I'm
Or should we
not
post
quite
on?
sure what she was planning on talking about for these, but there was a couple of conferences that DIA has attended, the Mass Housing Partnership, the Housing Institute.
Mhm.
So it gives, I went to it this year and went to it last year. They talk about different ways to, their main call to action right now is creating housing. I think that refrain is being said over and over and over again, that this state is in a housing crisis, and we really need housing to be built for all income levels, but particularly at the lower and moderate income.
Right.
Income affordability. So that's, they really hammer that home at that conference. And then there was a second day, and I didn't go to that. I needed to come back to the office and get some stuff done. And then there's, last week was the Congress for New Urbanism, the local government day. They talk about, their call to action is to create walkable neighborhoods, and they want to, similar to the Mass Housing Partnership, see municipalities increase their housing affordability, particularly through having less restrictive zoning regimes, incorporating inclusionary zoning, stuff like that. So they had, some seminars on how to draft incorporate those into your zoning code and how to advocate for those kinds of policies in your community.
There was a story, I think in the Globe business section this morning, on housing affordability, which talked about the ratio between the average cost of a house in Massachusetts versus the annual income,
Mhm.
which in a healthy environment should be 3. That is the cost of the house 3 times average annual income. It has now gone over 6. Which, and it just keeps rising and rising and rising, that ratio. So people's incomes may rise, but they're not rising anywhere near as quickly as and this is not Boston, this is all of Massachusetts, the average house in Massachusetts. which is, you know, supply and demand. The only answer to that is building more housing, and it can't just be in cities, it's gotta be,
And it can't
Everywhere.
just, it can't just be high-end houses.
that's right,
It can't be just.
all kinds, everywhere.
So, I went to two things since our last meeting. One was a thing sponsored by the state to educate towns and cities that the state has a federal funds committee that has money to use as local match and additional funding to help with your federally funded grants. And they have a lot of money. They have $700 million that was allocated to this. And secondly, I went to a symposium on local open space residential development. Prior to my going to this, on the way up there, I had to stop at a place where Nancy gets her paintings digitized, and she gets prints made. And this guy is doing this in the basement of his house in a huge subdivision in Lakeville. And they have 10% of the population of Lakeville in this
Wow, in
subdivision.
this one subdivision.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I asked him this time when I went up, because I talked to him a couple times, I said, how did this happen? He said, well, actually, the people at the symposium told me it's a 40B. And it has single-family houses, it has duplexes, and it has apartments. And I think the people from Lakeville who were there said that it's a long-term 40B, and this hasn't been without problems, but
Wasn't Ocean
It's-
Spray, was it?
I don't think so. It was like 300 housing units, something like that. It's huge. And it goes on and on and on, and it goes from one type of housing to another. And Nancy was saying as we're driving through, well, 40B has to be, some of it has to be affordable. Which ones are affordable? I said, they're not supposed to be
Only 10%.
identifiable.
Only 10% has to be.
Or 10%? I thought it was
10%.
20%. Anyway, it was interesting. But then somebody else contacted me about assessed values here in Westport. And they owned a lot on one of the ponds. And then they bought two of the lots that came before us 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, where they changed the border of one of them. And the first tax bill they got was for the combined two lots as one. And the most recent tax bill, for which they filed an abatement, split them. So now he's got two tax bills for exactly the same amount as the first one, so now it's double the amount of tax. And called me because he knows I'm here, wanting to know what that's about. I said, I don't know. I talked to Michael, and I said, because the previous strategy for assessors was if you had two contiguous lots in the same ownership, and
Right.
both of them are substandard size for zoning, they can merge them.
Right.
And that's the law of the merger. That's state law. But this new housing bill that was signed by the governor last fall upends that and says that lots that normally would have been merged under that doctrine are no longer merged. So, and I'm thinking about all the lots contiguous with Kapori's place, where he was supposed to have the
Yes,
extra road
yes,
coming
yes,
through.
Yep,
Somebody bought all that land. And those were part of, I don't know if it was a railroad park or some other thing like that, it was all little lots that were combined, and I think now you can uncombine them. And I think they probably were 10 or 20,000 square foot lots originally. And the new law is that you can have, if it has 10,000 square feet, you can uncouple it.
You can
And
do what, Jim?
uncouple it from a merger.
So if the,
but and do they get assessed as separate lots just because you have the potential to do,
they're going to be
I think so.
assessed as potentially developable now, as opposed to undevelopable, because the ability to develop them comes with some stipulations. So,
Right.
as Jim said, 10,000 square feet of area, you have to have 75 feet of frontage. The lots also have to have conformed, when they were created, conformed to zoning at that time.
And these,
Or if they
Yeah.
predate zoning, then, obviously they would hit that stipulation. But the homes that are developed there cannot be larger than 1,850 square feet in gross floor area. And the houses cannot be used for short-term or seasonal rentals. And they have to have at least
they
3.
can be seasonal rentals, they can't be used for, short-term rentals or, no, I guess
It's,
you're right.
yeah, the seasonal rent, yeah. And they have to have 3 bedrooms in them.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. It's not that they can't be more than 3 bedrooms, they have to have
They
at
have to
least
have
3
3.
bedrooms.
Yep.
If not more. And, I think the question of when you don't have infrastructure, then the DEP regulations come in and say that for 10,000 square feet, you can only have 1 bedroom.
yeah.
But then you have this law that says it must be 3 bedrooms.
And
And
if they, I mean, it's like Railroad Park and stuff like that, that has all these paper streets and if the assessors go then and say, go back and they're 50 by 100 lots or something, you send out 20 separate.
tax bills for,
Yeah, well, it depends on what the bills are, but those aren't buildable.
right. But I guess you could combine 2 of them, get 10,000 square feet. And it's got paper streets, and anybody who owns land on the paper street can improve it.
But we're
So
not-
my question to Michael is, we're trying to figure out how do we zone for starter housing? How do we zone for, non-60,000 square foot? Maybe we use this already done stuff somehow, and make a regulation that we could live with to do. But otherwise, I think we have the potential for people coming in to, I don't even know if they have to come to us to subdivide it, unless they have to change the subdivision. So,
Well, the septic's gonna start governing this.
right,
Right.
We have to think about then rezoning, as you said, Jim, parts of the town, have different districts where you'll have the areas for the 60,000 square foot, but then you'll have other districts in town where
it's
you could
less.
have 10,000.
Right. And so, this is so new that I don't know if anybody knows what this all means, but I think, it's something we gotta pay attention to, because otherwise, I mean, that land that they bought east between Kafori's and Highland Avenue, was that part of Railroad Park?
I think
Because I think it was.
it's up in that area.
Yeah.
So, and then, you know, down at the, near the point, we have, like, down by, can't remember the name of the street, but down,
Valentine Lane?
not Valentine Lane, but down Scotch Pine Lane.
Oh,
You know where that is?
yes, yep.
Down there, somebody before the Great Depression had made a huge subdivision.
Yep.
All that land down there in small lots.
Yep.
Thinking that Horse Neck was gonna become Coney Island, or a Coney Island up here. And then, I guess, lost their shirt in the Depression and didn't ever do anything with it, but that still exists on paper. And I don't know what you do about all these things.
We are going to be looking at, Mark, what you, and Jim, what you were talking about with Serpent this summer. So we took a little bit of a break of the corridor plan with them. They had come and presented before the board, and we've taken a bit of a break just to make it easy for reporting for the end of the fiscal year, but we'll be starting that back up in July.
Okay.
And that's one thing that we had initially identified was dealing with, you know, we have these neighborhoods where the lot sizes do not align with what zoning allows. Now with this act that was passed, I think it underscores a need to try to reconcile the zoning so it's consistent with what that act allows as well as what is actually playing out on the ground with the lot sizes.
Right, and I think it would be good if we could get some kind of money somehow to really do a deep dive on what Westport has for all these little things that aren't developed and could possibly become an issue. So, and I don't know where you get a grant for that, but maybe we could use some of the Serpent money.
Could
We
be,
have Serpent hours to use.
I think most of those are up for the planning board or spoken for next year.
Already?
We obviously haven't used them, but I think it's gonna go into, a different grant that we had applied for, yeah.
Okay. Minutes?
Mr. Chair, there are two sets of minutes before us today. May 20th, which I've read, and again, these minutes get better and better. They're long, they're comprehensive, they're accurate, they've got the required appendices or attachments, and I didn't see any problems with May 20th, so I would move acceptance of the minutes,
Second?
May 20th, 2025.
Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the other set of minutes before us are June 3rd. I had just one, I think they're accurate, and I'll move acceptance of June 3rd minutes. I have one question on
I'll second
in discussion. On page 5 of those minutes, at the top of the page, it talked about a motion to draft a letter commending the resilience plan, that's the state resilience plan, while emphasizing the need for funding, et cetera, and it says next steps, Burris will draft a letter and circulate it for board review before submission. I just wanted to know, did that happen?
We sent it out.
Yeah.
I didn't circulate it with the board because we
Okay,
didn't
but
have
it
enough
went,
time.
it got into the state in time?
Yeah.
Perfect. So moved and seconded.
Go ahead. Didn't hear the second. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Want a motion to adjourn?
I do.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Jeez, Mom.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.